Okay. Hey everyone, I am Lucy Zarlengo. I am the CMO in residence at Demand Spring, and today I have Jonathan Milne who's joining me. He is our VP of AI strategy, and we're going to talk about establishing AI goals in a marketing organization. So we know AI is on everyone's agenda, all CMOs, marketing leaders, etc. But for many marketing teams, the direction might not be fully clear yet in terms of how they are implementing AI, right? I know we're seeing that across many of the Demand Spring clients as well as people in our networks that we're speaking to. And leaders have a sense that they need to like go do AI, but without clear goals, there's this risk of actually like focusing on the wrong things or spinning your wheels on activities that are actually not going to make the right business impact. And so what we want to talk about today is how to set AI goals and define the right KPIs and then measure success in order to make sure that all investments in AI are actually driving real business value and we're not just in this cycle of ongoing experimentation. And so, John, what we're seeing right now is this like culture of experimentation, and it's starting to transition to really embedding AI into how work is being done kind of consistently in workflows across marketing teams. There's a lot of trying tools and in maybe different silos, but there's not yet this like shared definition of like what does AI success actually look like, which I think is risky, right, as a CMO, because it can feel like it just becomes this like side project
Yep.
and not part of the core marketing strategy. So would love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and for sure. And if you think about, people are trying to get their checklists off, you'll see something like, I gave marketing a budget, therefore my AI strategies kind of already executed, or we launched our internal compliance and rules of how to use AI. Okay, that's check mark, right? Or I give access to tools, check mark. There's a few things where I think organizations are patting themselves on the back and they think they're kind of on the right path. And all they've done is kind of created an environment where people don't know what to do, right? So they have no clue, okay? So that this whole experimentation, and I think experimentation is a good thing to happen. I think teams need to continue to experiment. But if you're only experimenting to no focused goals or no focused endpoint, then you're just an innovation lab. And labs don't usually create revenue and don't create products or solutions and services that help you get ahead, right? So I think that's the balance that we have to think about when we start to kind of kick off our journey of how to increase AI adoption internally.
Yep. So how should CMOs start thinking about a framework in order to establish goals then around their AI programs and initiatives?
Well, it's a super fun topic because OpenAI actually just launched about a week or two ago a report. And if you haven't downloaded it, I think everyone should. It's called Staying Ahead in the Age of AI. And it's they call it a leadership guide. But what they did was something similar to what we built here internally. They kind of talked about five key things that you need to do to adopt AI internally. So they call it align, activate, amplify, accelerate, and govern. And so it's kind of five reminders of five things you need to do to roll out and kind of get people to use AI. And one thing I'll add to it that they don't really talk about that I see a lot of is that AI is not a technology problem. AI is not a challenge around, how do we increase the tools and the MarTech and make sure, we're using the latest features. It's a people change management problem. And
Mhm.
we often talk here at Demand Spring about an AI first mindset. What we mean is that you have to start thinking about how to use AI in everything you do. And it's easy to say, it's very hard to do.
Yep, that makes total sense. So in terms of that overall framework, maybe we can
Mhm.
start thinking about like what would be some goals for a marketing organization across that framework. So from an aligned perspective,
Sure.
I'm thinking, there needs to be some establishment in terms of how are we going to leverage AI across the organization and have some clear definition of what that looks like. Would you agree with that?
100%. So the Align framework, it's all about, it's very obvious, but it's funny how we don't do this. We say we want to increase AI adoption in the company, or we want to make, company-wide AI adoption, as a goal. Well, what does adoption mean? Right? Same thing like if you're going to do good prompting, you have to give context to an AI model. What does adoption mean to you? And so you really have to make sure that you explain what adoption is, who and how you're allowed to use it, who are going to be your leaders as you think about rolling it out and stuff like that. And then more importantly, as part of the adoption thing, what I find fascinating, especially in large organizations, is that The executives seem to be pushing it down, but
Hmm.
not taking it on themselves. So
Hmm.
there's a great story, for example, at OpenAI in this article. It talks about their CFO is actually one of the biggest internal champions at OpenAI to use ChatGPT internally. Not marketing, not sales, not the department of IT or product management. We're the CFO, right? And so I think that's a good example of there's a lot of executives saying, well, this is not for me, but if you're really going to drive it, it's going to have to be for everyone. So if we agree to alignment of where we need to go, how everyone has to be part of the journey, it's not just a top-down exercise. We have some definitions. Then there's some stuff we can do that's very easy to measurement. So one of the things we tend to measure here is we tend to, especially before we do some of the other stages of this, measure how do people feel today? What do
Hmm.
what they're allowed to use? Do some pulse surveys internally to get a kind of an understanding of what is people's curiosity about AI, the tools they're using, their confidence, how well they think they can do in prompting. Get a few little baselines, right? And then create a little dashboard of, we talked about those experiments. The first thing you want to do is let's put all those experiments onto something. So if people are experimenting, let's get them to talk about what are they experimenting with and stick it on a simple spreadsheet, a dashboard, whatever. But at least there's now some clarity and some visualization of seeing what's done. And then you can start to add a few things to that dashboard, like what's the objective of it? What does success looks like? How long until we see something? What happens if the success? How do we roll this out through the company? How do we use it? So now you're starting to put some purpose behind these experimentations, but don't it's kind of like a good fire. Don't put out the fire right now when people are excited. Nurture those fires because those fires might be the early signs of how to actually turn some of your ideas into something really good. There's a couple examples of, I think it was Notion, who had some internal team members at a hackathon come up with an idea, and now the Notion AI is based on that hackathon idea. So it's like, something that's like absolute critical to the business came from the bottom up. So that's it. And then the last thing I would also do is just make sure that the conversations of AI are consistent. So if you have one-on-ones, monthly reports, strategies, make sure that the AI objectives and alignments and how it rolls up and how it all works all becomes super clear. So that's the kind of the first step is the align.
Yeah, I love especially making sure that that's clear to the organization and how you're sharing that out. I think when we think about how marketing organizations are typically run and operate, you likely have monthly all hand meetings or all staff meetings, you have QBRs, you have, different kind of ways that you are sharing out overall progress against pipeline generation, maybe brand metrics, et cetera. So making sure that your team has visibility to that information, I think is really helpful in terms of one, making sure it's top of mind, but two, helping to grow that momentum. So it's reminding folks that, hey, as you have ideas, you have experiments you want to run, as we're starting to see progress, like here's how we're tracking and managing to it. So I love that idea and recommendation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so the activate stage, let's talk
Yeah.
about that.
So this is where we enable teams with a safe space to train and learn and experiment, right? So again, we're still doing some experimentation, but now these experiments have a clear goal, or as we said, aligned to something. So this is where, like your past organization, one of the first things you should do is do some training. So your
Mhm.
department, your L&D department, or someone needs to find a partner that's going to teach you. Make sure the learning is not focused on tools. Again, tools keep changing, the features are going to keep
Yep.
changing. You're not going to win by tools. So what you want is about prompting and context engineering and learning and creating a change management program, right? So you're going to do some stuff around that. Next is you need to find champions. So every organization is going to have a few people who are leaning in right now. Make sure you identify them, provide them some guidance, and get them involved with these other teams to create that nurturing environment. The third one is the hardest one. Dedicate time for people. So a lot of organizations are saying we want to invest in our people in AI. We give them some budget, but the one thing we're not giving them is a little bit of a set time. So if you remember, Google used to have that rule. I don't know if they still do it. The 20% of your time is you can experiment on anything you want. We kind of have to go back to that now. To learn AI and to become proficient at AI, it takes time. And so
Yep.
you have to give people time. And then the last one is, again, align activation also with your alignment. And the first step is, are you measuring this as career growth and performance reviews? If you don't measure it as something that you have to put in your performance reviews, have you upskilled? Have you learned a new tool? Are you more confident, curious with AI technologies? Do you have a good ability to write prompts? Can you share those with other people? then what's the point? If you don't tie it to someone's um, job performance, then it's hard to do it. And then the measures are very simple. Are we daily, weekly, monthly talking about this stuff? Are we sharing custom GPTs and prompts internally? Have people completed training and enrollment? Have people moved prototypes to production, as an example? Have people been promoted because they become champions and that's how they got to the next level of growth internally of the company? Those types of things will make sure that, when we say, hey, we said, here's the plan. Now we need to activate it. Let's reinforce the right actions that are aligned, right? So the activation really becomes part of that alignment.
Yep. Yep. And I think a few things there. I think the point around dedicating time, I think that that is so critically important. I know when I worked with you at my last organization on a prompt training program, we had dedicated hours twice a week where one was a learning session. Coming out of that learning session, the team had time then to kind of do some of their own experimentation, play around with what they learned that week. And then there was another set of times at the end of the week for show and tell and discussion and kind of asking and answering questions. I think, every organization is different. Some organizations block off part of their Wednesdays, every other Friday, whatever that looks like. But I think it's important and imperative for the marketing leadership team or the CMO to be kind of tops down, making sure that they're carving off time on calendars. And I've even, at prior organizations, just blocked people's calendar in my full organization for a set period of time and communicated this is a learning time for the team. I think another thing that you mentioned about is, how do you make sure that you're measuring this from a career growth perspective and setting and establishing goals? A lot of organizations towards the end of the year start going into annual performance review cycles and then setting and establishing goals for the following year. And I think, best practice is always having at least one development goal in addition to kind of the business outcomes you need to drive. So I fully agree of for each individual, their leader or manager working with them to understand like what is a goal around AI that they need to include as kind of part of their specific set of initiatives that they're going to be focused on for the following year, whatever that right time frame is.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep. Okay, so Amplify.
Yeah, so Amplify is that idea of how do we scale things that work and share the knowledge. And what's really interesting about AI in particular as a technology is that um, good companies are going to start to ask more cross collaboration sorry, across different departments. So if you start to look at any organization that's starting to win with AI, you'll start to notice that usually it's the tech team leads the technology implementation, and usually product is doing some really cool stuff. But the impact on the organization, I find, usually tends to be marketing led. And then marketing starts to get comfortable with it, and salespeople start to ask for some help. And then HR might ask for some help. And then the finance team starts to ask for help. And you start to find it kind of percolate, right? So to amplify, you guys start thinking about how do we create an AI knowledge hub to share prompts, examples, learnings, education, wins, stuff like that, right? You want to also reinforce in team meetings, promotions, social channels, and stuff like that. So Amplify is really about find what is working in the organization and make sure everybody is aware. So, we often talk about internal education around like wins and product launches and stuff like that. Well, it's now we have to get back to learning wins. And that's something a little bit different for enterprise teams to think about. And we don't often do that. And so that's kind of where we have to add this into those internal newsletters and things like that.
Yeah, I think that that's great. I think especially the point around working cross-functionally. I know, for most marketing organizations, B2B, your peer organizations are generally the sales organization, the customer team, and it can be really sitting down with them to understand, here's what we're doing from a marketing perspective. How can we extend that in terms of how the sales team can leverage some of either the same prompts in order for them to generate, whether it be outbound scripts or outbound email content or whatever it may be. So I think there's a huge opportunity not just to keep everything within the silo of marketing and making sure there's kind of more broad exposure and also seeing what some of those organizations are starting to do. I know at my last organization, we had some really eager sales reps who were leveraging some AI tools and trying to do new things as well. And so, kind of having that collaboration and even potentially standing up some type of like tiger team or core group for ideation that's not just sitting within the walls of marketing, I think is really important as well.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So acceleration, how do we speed up decisions to keep up with AI?
Yeah, so I'm going to actually, just to make it easier, I'm going to take the accelerate and the govern conversation together because I do sometimes feel like they're hand in hand. because sometimes it's like some organizations, you got one hand telling you to go faster, and in a larger organization, you might have another hand saying, "Well, hold on a sec." So you might have an example of a CEO saying, "We need to push forward on AI. I've technically approved your budgets and all that stuff. Let's go." And then when it comes to reality on the governance side, you've got the IT department saying, "Well, what about the risk and security?" You got your compliance team saying, "Well, hold on, can we approve this?" And there's kind of this yin and the yang that happens, right? So
Mhm.
I think organizations really have to understand that when you accelerate, you also have to make sure you have the right, governance and responsible playbooks and guidelines and how you're allowed to use it. And the two of them have to be kind of adapting together at the same time. So, a very simple example is, here at Demand Spring, we're already into like, our fourth or fifth kind of core sprint on AI innovation, and we've already updated our internal guidance principles 3 or 4 times. And so you start to learn more, you understand how the technology works, you have to do that. But on the push side, we've got to find ways to that, if you find something good, there's organization has the capacity, the resources, the budget to kind of accelerate, right? If you find something that is, a great idea that needs to be productized, is there going to be a way to wrap around a team to productize that? So there's a lot of things where people keep, again, like I said, they kind of start with a plan, they push it out, and then they kind of sit back and wait, and they don't realize that actually to accelerate, you have to get more involved more frequently than you think. It's not like a quarterly exercise, right? So,
Right.
we did a training program for a client, and by the time we got to the last 2 weeks, what we found out was they had their tool throttled down. So what we were teaching them could not happen anymore, even though they had it a week ago, and no one explained why. No one explained the policies change. It's just literally 40 people in training show up to the tool and a functionality is turned off, and we're all just puzzled, right? And so we're like, well, how did that decision happen? Why did that decision happen? And then people, so it's very clear one group is got one mandate and one group has the other. That's why the
Right.
accelerate and govern seem to need to be more aligned. So you'll see things like, if you talk about measurements, you'll see organizations creating stuff like the AI committee teams or the governance teams and stuff like that. Well, then are they fully supported by the C-suite? Do they have control over budget? Do they have the control over the compliance and IT security? Who mandates them? How do they get reviewed? There's a little bit of an extra need there than saying that they're responsible for governance, but not having any of the other levers to do the acceleration because you can't govern and accelerate at the same time. They have to be joint.
Yeah, and I think that's a great call to action for CMOs to make sure that there's representation, either them as individuals or from their team as part of that governance board, and really pushing to make sure that the governance is not being done kind of outside the walls of the folks who are actually leveraging the technology from a go-to-market perspective or whatever it may be. So I think that's critically important. Another thing that you mentioned that I think is important as well, and it's more around kind of the acceleration piece, but I think it ties to governance is at some point, there needs to be processes put in place so that there is a clear sense of how are you intaking kind of net new ideas into the organization? How are those being prioritized? How are those being operationalized? I think as you move from kind of this align phase, the amplify to accelerate, it's really making sure that there is a clear process for your team. As it seems like as folks start doing more and more with AI, and I've seen this myself, and with teams that I've managed, there starts to become a lot more momentum of ideas, but then there needs a way in order to define like how are we actually going to take this in and understand what do we go prioritize. Almost the ideas can exceed the capacity of the team in terms of what you can actually take on.
Yeah, and processes for some people is kind of like a four-letter word, and I
Right.
don't think it is. I think the way you ever think about a process, if the process is following the core mandate of like that acceleration and
Yep.
amplify and moving things, and you're writing all the processes to help make sure that things are unblocked faster, things are measured, that if there's an outcome, we know then with that outcome we can do even more. If the processes are built that way, then you're going to do extremely great things. If the processes are all about slowing you down, making it more difficult, jump through more hoops, add less clarity, then you're going the wrong way, right? So when we talk about processes, we should make say, hey, if we took our process and we track one of the most successful projects so far, how could that project be even more successful or move faster or be better or get more things? Then that's the process we want to create, right? To amplify and push versus restricted control, right? And it's a little bit harder because on governance, that's what they're really focused on is restriction and control. And a lot of governance people are governing without real knowledge. So one thing that's not talked in this place that I don't see enough is there's still not enough people who've never seen what a chatbot is, hasn't seen what a custom GPT is, doesn't really understand what a prompt is, doesn't understand that their internal tools or some of the tools they're using actually use an OpenAI platform or use a Gemini or a Grok or one of these other tools. So they're putting these restrictions around without understanding the underlying things that are happening. And so for anyone's technical or anyone who can understand it, you start raising more questions than answers of like, do you
Mhm.
understand it? And you start to create this like unevenness. So being transparent, open, discussion about this, bringing in people to help guide these discussions, I think are super important at this stage of our AI adoption.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, in many cases, we know we've talked about this is, CMOs are overwhelmed with kind of the growing scope of the marketing leader within an organization. And I think, there are situations where that can be on you in order to educate the organization. It can also be extremely beneficial to bring in a third party to help you do that within your organization, right? Whether that be bringing in a third party for prompt training services that, like, for example, Demand Spring offers, whatever it may be, there are going to be opportunities and certainly needs as things continue to evolve and change where you're not going to be able to have all of the answers. Your team may not have all of the answers, but there are folks in the space who are spending their day to day making sure that they are up to speed on the latest and greatest in terms of overall approaches, what's changing with technology, what's changing with the tools, new, kind of new service offerings, et cetera. So I think as well, it's don't put it all on yourself in order to kind of go do all of this work and drive the process all the way from align to governance. There's definitely opportunities to lean on third parties, to lean on agencies you already have relationships or even peers in your network in order to kind of help move this forward in your organization.
I'll add a little caveat for people to know who to talk to.
Yep.
Anyone you talk to that tends to start to use a lot more AI jargon would be the ones I would avoid.
Yep.
They're overcomplicating things to try to make things sound a lot more difficult than they truly are. So find partners that are going to distill this into the nomenclature we've been used to. Of course, there's a few new words that we have to get to know, but there's a lot of nomenclature being created to create an absolute layer of complexity to things that are quite simple.
Yep.
So the example I always give is, people throw out the term RAG a lot, and a RAG is literally for most use cases a way to save files. So you're literally just saying, hey, I'm going to add a few files as a reference or an example to a prompt
Mhm.
in my custom GPT, and that's a RAG, right? And I just
Mhm.
don't understand why we have to overcomplicate things. I think part of the reason why OpenAI published this report, and you'll notice OpenAI is also publishing business use cases and other things on adoption, is they're realizing that the industry is not adopting this as fast as they wish, because obviously they're very much motivated for what the billions of dollars they're spending
Of course.
to get more revenue. But like at first you're like, well, why would they create an adoption guide? Well, it's because they're realizing people are struggling with this, right? And so they're trying to help us. And I think part of the reason people are struggling with this is that every week we seem to be coming up with new terminologies, right? So, instead of prompt engineering, the latest term is going to be called context engineering, right? All it means is adding context to your prompt. How clear are you? And that's
Mhm.
because in the latest guidelines from ChatGPT, they talked about clarity as a big mistake, and we humans are actually very unclear. So the one example I always give when we do prompting is someone will say like, make this blog post better, right? Or write the best something or other. Well, what does better and best mean? You didn't put any context of what's better to you. Is better longer, shorter, faster, more verbose? Do you want it more complicated? You want it rated at a grade level 5, or do you want a grade level 12? Like what's better to you, right? And so we humans naturally, when we talk to each other, we're actually very poor at communicating clarity, right? Which is very interesting. And AI is struggling with that. So they're trying
Yep.
very hard to add clarity to us humans into writing stuff, right? And a very simple example I always give is that Google AI, when you ask for the weather, you notice you don't have to put the location because it already knows where you are.
Right.
AI needs clarity. So they need to know the where are you to then give you the weather, right? So
Right.
it's those types of things they're trying very hard to add to the reasoning models.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that's great advice going back to your point in terms of, focusing on external thought leaders, partners that you have, et cetera, that are not overcomplicating this. I think at its core, and this is a complete oversimplification, but AI is kind of, net new technology that can be a foundation to how you go to market as a marketing organization. It can be managed or leveraged in many different use cases across your organization, starting with this aligned framework that you talked about, which is really understanding like where can you best leverage AI? Where should you prioritize your efforts? But I do think sometimes you can feel this pressure as a CMO to kind of know the latest and greatest of all technology and all tools. And just given the speed and the rapid change around AI, that's nearly impossible to keep up with. And I know you and I talk all of the time, and you're always introducing me to kind of new vendors and new technology. And I'm sure, sometimes you may feel you're only scratching the surface of everything that's available. And this is where, you focus a lot of your time. And so I think as senior marketers, it's thinking through who are partners you already have a relationship, who are vendors that you're already working with, and like not overcomplicating things too quickly. Because I think if you feel overwhelmed and feel that it's overcomplicated, your team below you is not going to be able to follow the overall journey of what you're trying to go do, right? They are heads down day-to-day execution, and in many cases earlier in their career and still navigating this level of change, or maybe haven't yet seen this level of change in their career.
Yeah, and I am a strong believer there's no experts in the space
Yep.
anywhere. Everyone is learning. The
Hmm.
stuff is changing. What you think worked one week does not work next week. They change the model. It does not work the way you want. You want to, go back a model, which you saw with a lot of people in five with ChatGPT, that a lot of people prefer their four. So yeah, like I'm a believer of it's an environment where we have to spend this continuous time to learn, play, and be comfortable with the unknown, right? And that's the hardest thing for most organizations is that there's a fairly large unknown because at the start of this, if you invest in this, what do I get out of it? We marketers have always been asked, if I put X in, I want to know what my Y is, right? With this one, we're not sure yet. And that's a very uncomfortable conversation to have. We do know that's going to help. We just don't know how to measure it yet if I put an X. Now, I know how to measure the Y. So, for example, ads, use AI to improve the ads. You can track it very easily. I'm just saying that it's not easy yet for us to know if I do X amount of investment, I'm going to get Y, right? But I
Right.
can track my Y because of my investment and give you that. But I just can't predict it yet, the impact. And then the other thing I'm gonna challenge a lot of people to have, especially at the board levels and the C-suite, is one thing that we know is marketing is going to change drastically. So my big prediction about the future is the channels we think today are going to be heavily digitally content saturated, which means either two things. You have to produce even more content to stand out, or we're going to have to find new channels and new ways to stand out. And
Hmm.
that's a very uncomfortable thing because for most marketers, our bets are going to be on here are my top two or three channels. I'm going to use AI to improve them. They'll get some good gains, and I think it's really important to get those gains in the next kind of 18 months to 2 years. And then after that, the big unknown is okay, now what?
Hmm.
Right? Like what happens when everybody can now produce thought leadership videos in 30 seconds through one simple prompt, where it's my brain, sorry, my look, my everything faked, background faked. I'm in some beautiful paradise or in the manufacturing warehouse guiding you through it, and everything is faked. Then what, right? Well, it
Yep.
could be that people are going to want to see that this was made with AI, and then people are going to choose, I want to look at AI videos, or maybe I want to go back to human videos, right? And
Right.
then suddenly all those gains are gone, right?
Right.
We don't know.
Right. Yep. A lot of things to think through. And I think as well, there's also an opportunity to think about from a volume perspective, right, with AI, there's a lot of opportunity for increasing in content creation to apply to a lot new channels or making sure that you are reaching your potential buyer across every channel possible, right? I also think that there's a case to think about from a quality perspective. How do you make sure that there's also the quality component and really you're differentiating yourself in the overall market with the content you're creating, that you're best representing your brand, that you have a brand that resonates and stands out as well. And so I think that there's this fine balance of AI can provide this scale, but at the same time, maybe what's going to differentiate you is something that's far more authentic and something that's far more differentiated. And maybe you're focusing on kind of fewer channels, fewer things in order to make bigger impact.
Yeah, I think we should do another call on that and talk about
Yep.
like we talked a little about the org teams. We can dig a little bit more into what the skills are. I have some ideas on what kind of new people I think we have to hire in the marketing organization, and some of the channels we're going to build are going to be different. So yeah,
Yep.
that'd be a fun follow-up.
Yep. Okay, so tying it back to, at the beginning we talked about establishing goals and KPIs in your marketing organization. What closing advice would you have for any B2B marketing leader?
Yeah, so one thing that's super different about it, we've been pounded on metrics, metrics, metrics. In this case, I think we need a new metric around AI, and it's around like what experiments I've done, how well they're going, how does my team feel, what new tools we've tried. I think sometimes for other teams in an organization, marketing looks like a black box, right? And we all ask marketing to do something for us, but we sometimes don't understand how, like, how the sausage is made, right? And I think with this AI adoption, I think we have to, for the very first time, give at least the first 6 to 9 months more visibility to others of what we're doing so they're aware. And that way, when things come out of this, they're prepared and they understood and they watched it progress, right?
Yep.
If you simply put money in, I go quiet for a quarter, I come out and say, here's some results on our current channels, and I don't explain what we're doing to try to make changes and make impact short term and long term, I think we're missing an opportunity. So for more reports, I think there needs to be kind of a little bit more like a footnote and a little bit more of a description of what we're trying to do and achieve to explain it. And I think you're going to find a lot more champions are going to want to get involved in it. Like
Yep.
I looked at prompt training example. We have one client, we trained the marketing team. Now we're training the learning development team, a financials team, some people from product management, some people from the executive team. They somehow picked, I think they got 70 people. So marketing's about 40, and suddenly they've got 70 new people who are interested in it because they saw what happened in marketing,
Right.
right? And it's all across the organization. So it'll be a very different type of training for us because it's going to be multifunctional. But it just shows you that because marketing was sharing what they were doing, other people were like, well, hold on. Could we learn from that? What could we adopt from? What could we try out, right? And you can see the culture shift. And
Yep.
like we talked about, these adoption things, culture shift is really the most important thing for AI adoption, right?
Yep.
And anyone who's done culture shift, have you ever gone through an acquisition of a company, and you see how long it takes to shift a culture? It's not an overnight success thing, right? And so I keep saying that anybody who's done change management, who has done large projects and had to change large teams or gone through um, an acquisition,
Mhm.
this feels very similar to me. Is
Yep.
how much impact it has and how much you're taking people on a journey slowly through change. Because it's really fascinating to me. We humans, it's funny, we don't change easily. Very few
Yep.
of us like change. It's fascinating.
Yep. No, and I love that example of marketing leading and then influencing the broader organization in terms of some of those prompt training programs. And I think that's a huge takeaway in terms of marketing is often leading in these types of initiatives, especially adoption of new technology. And this is one way that, the CMO can have greater influence across the organization. And, kind of final thought is, as you were talking is, there's a huge partnership and collaboration that marketing can have with your HR team, learning and development, HR business partner in terms of that change management component, right? It's not just on you as the individual leader to help drive that change. Lean on others in the organization who have built their careers around that or who have, kind of a lot of depth of experience in driving change management to help kind of move things forward within the organization or troubleshoot where
Your
necessary.
HR and L&D teams
Yep.
are going to be your champions for this because they have some skills that some of us may have never gone through,
Sure.
right?
Yep.
If you've gone through a lot of growth in marketing, it's quite easy when you just keep adding people and just things go to rotate. That
Yep.
is much more different, right?
Yep.
And so yeah, you're absolutely right. Those are your champions to help coach you on how to get better at change management for sure.
Yep. Great. Well, thanks for the conversation today.
It was great. Talk to you
All right.
soon.
Thanks.